A notice from the U.S. government says imported items that are labeled Made in Hong Kong will now have to be changed to Made in China instead. The change is expected to take effect next month.
The U.S. Customs and Border Protection says products made in Hong Kong and exported to the U.S. will need to be labeled Made in China starting next month. In July, the United States determined that Hong Kong is, quote, no longer sufficiently autonomous to justify differential treatment in relation to China. Hong Kong companies will get a 45-day grace period to mark that their exports originate from China. We spoke with business professor Frank Hsieh. He says the Hong Kong dollar might be the next to be negatively impacted.
With Hong Kong being part of China, I think the Hong Kong dollar will lose this prestige in Hong Kong's banking and financial system.
He says the change will largely affect businesses on the Chinese side.
The major impact should be felt by the Chinese side because they just lost another channel for them to export.
A couple of New Yorkers told us they are not very confident with products labeled Made in China compared to labeled Made in Hong Kong.
I think China is a vast country, and so the question is something made in a factory in the middle of nowhere where the regulations aren't being followed. Whereas Hong Kong, I believe, is more of an international community, and therefore it feels to me like it would, the odds are it would be higher quality.
I probably wouldn't buy it. Like China's products the quality aren't as good, and Hong Kong is I just feel like their quality is better.
Hong Kong exporters will pay the same trade tariffs as Chinese exporters. The change is expected to come September 25th. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
A 53-year-old Chinese man was finally deemed not guilty after 27 years in prison, but his release comes too late as he's already lost everything. The prospect for compensation from authorities is highly unlikely.
After almost 27 years in prison and relentless pleading, one Chinese man has finally been pronounced innocent by Supreme Court of Jiangxi Province. His name is Zhang Yuhuan. Back in 1993, Zhang was accused of murdering his neighbor's 2 sons. He's been imprisoned ever since, but on August 4th, the court acquitted him based on unclear facts and insufficient evidence in the original trial. Zhang's family was torn apart by his sentence. His wife was forced to divorce him, but never forgot about him.
I asked him whether he did it. He said, I honestly didn't. Trust me, I didn't. He told me he admitted guilt because the police set dogs to attack him, beat him up, would not let him sleep in order to force him to admit guilt.
According to a Civil Rights and Livelihood Watch report, the dog bite scars can still be seen on his leg.
They needed to settle the case, so even when there was no evidence, they'll torture him until he admits guilt. Under the CCP's rule, there are many cases like this one. They knew he was innocent, but would rather cover up their mistake with another mistake. Nobody holds them accountable, and nobody punishes them. It's a tragedy for all Chinese people that the Communist Party is in power.
Delayed justice released Zhang from prison after nearly 30 years. But Zhang's defense lawyer posted on social media saying delayed justice is never justice. After Zhang was freed, he met with his brother, where both of them cried. During Zhang's imprisonment, his brother also never gave up on him. Another of Zhang's lawyers, Shan Manqing, said he was impressed by Zhang's brother's constant effort to free him. Manqing posted on social media that Zhang Yuhan's brother kept going to the High Court to inquire about the progress of the case and kept appealing. The efforts of families behind each wrongful conviction also is crucial for success.
New White House documents give a glimpse of what the TikTok ban could look like. It could cripple the app's growth by cutting it from U.S. app stores and advertisers.
Reuters reports new White House documents reveal how President Trump's executive order to ban China's TikTok app could play out. The documents were sent out to reporters last week. They show the order could prevent U.S. app stores from offering TikTok for download, and it would make advertising on the app illegal. Last week, President Trump signed an order banning transactions with TikTok if its parent company ByteDance doesn't sell its U.S. assets to an American company in 45 days. So far, Microsoft has been leading talks to acquire TikTok's operations in North America. The app has about 100 million active users in the United States. Lawmakers cite concerns that TikTok may be sharing American user data with Chinese authorities. TikTok denies the allegations. But China's 2017 national intelligence law requires Chinese citizens and organizations to cooperate with state intelligence work. Bloomberg News reports China will likely bring up TikTok and WeChat with U.S. trade negotiators in the coming days, when they meet to discuss implementation of the Phase 1 trade deal.
The UK's media regulator is deciding on a penalty for China's state-owned television operating in Britain. It had aired forced confessions from a British citizen who had been drugged, handcuffed, and locked inside a cage while in a Chinese prison. From London, our UK correspondent Jane Werrell sent this report.
China Global Television Network is designated a foreign agent in the United States. It chose London as a hub for a planned European expansion, moving into West London offices in 2018. Those expansion plans, though, may soon come to a halt. In July, the UK's media watchdog Ofcom ruled that the network seriously violated broadcasting rules when it aired footage of British citizen Peter Humphrey making a coerced confession from a prison in China. I asked him what happened.
The lenses of all these cameras are pointing through the bars of the cage at me. And I'm dopey because I've been given this sedation pill 45 minutes before.
Working as private fraud investigators in China, Humphrey and his wife were embroiled in a bribery investigation into a top manager in China, working at British pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline. Detained in July 2013, he was put in a cell with about 12 others.
The toilet was a hole in the corner of the floor. I was taken to interrogation cells almost every day to be interrogated by the police inside a cage.
He was accused of illegally obtaining and selling Chinese citizens' data, a charge he contested. Before facing trial, he says he was locked in a chair in a large cage.
Inspector Ding then proceeds to be the voice of a journalist, asking questions from a list that he's got on a clipboard. And every time I don't answer the way he hopes I will answer, he repeats. He does a retake, as it were. Having you locked in a cage in order to force you to do something is a form of torture.
He says a heavily edited version was aired on CGTN, then known as CCTV News. It's the English-language counterpart of state-owned China Central Television. Ofcom concluded its investigation in July and is now deciding what sanctions to impose on CGTN. Reports show that CGTN just rehired a former Ofcom director, Nick Pollard. He had quit because of concerns over the channel's coverage of the Hong Kong protests, which Ofcom found broke UK rules of impartiality. Ofcom is investigating other so-called confessions aired by CGTN.
The idea that you film a witness under duress giving a statement without their consent is incredibly serious, and also potentially allegations of some form of torture. Do that once is very serious. To have that 3 times, if proved guilty, is very, very serious. Ofcom will undoubtedly consider a fine. My best estimate is that it would be in 6 figures. They may even consider revocation of licence.
This was a complaint filed by an individual taking on the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda apparatus and saying, you have committed crimes against me under the UK broadcasting law.
Still feeling the trauma from his time in prison, he says his purpose now is to address the wrongs committed against him and his family and to help others in a similar situation. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
New Zealand's Prime Minister delayed a key step towards next month's general election. The country was plunged back into lockdown after the discovery of its first cases in more than 3 months.
New Zealand went over 3 months without a local coronavirus infection. Now, emergence of new cases have ended that record run. And as its biggest city re-enters lockdown, the country is putting plans for its upcoming elections on hold. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said she's suspending the dissolution of Parliament. It would have paved the way for polls to open next month. The news comes a day after Ardern announced that a family cluster of 4 cases had been detected in Auckland, New Zealand's largest city. They were the first cases reported in the country in just over 100 days. On Wednesday, there were lines outside the city's supermarkets and coronavirus test centers as Auckland moved back into a so-called Level 3 lockdown. That only allows for essential trips outside the home. The rest of the country has been placed under slightly looser level 2 restrictions as authorities scramble to trace the source of the latest infections. The family had not traveled overseas and is in strict isolation at home, but one woman had traveled while she was symptomatic to tourist spots in Rotorua on the country's North Island. Officials say they're investigating the possibility the virus was reintroduced on the surface of cargo brought in from overseas.